Okay, day 73, still no Eric Braverman. His husband, Neil Brown, works for KKNR, which is a global equity firm, private equity firm specializing in the oil business. If you've been watching the series, you'll pick that up. And today I wanted to talk about how decisions in the U.S. are really made at the oil and gas kind of level at a place called the Council of Foreign Relations, the CFR. And I'm going to wind that into some other things that have happened at the CFR. But then the World Bank, where Eric Braverman was at, he was a consultant for McKinsey, he's going to fall in line and put in a plan for electrical grid and water lines and so forth and roads to support this. So a big part of this planning is to make sure that you have an infrastructure so that the construction of the pipelines go well. He's the pipeline guy. So this is where decisions start. Then from the Council on Foreign Relations, they all talk about where the pipeline should go. And then he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And that's where you form this little consortium of investors, both from Democratic side and the Republican side, because you don't know who's going to be in the White House with the Army. You just want to make sure you're all invested, so you cover it both ways. Then you go to the senators, like Hillary Clinton at the time. This is, let's say, in the year 2000. And that's why you're going to also go to the Armed Services Committee, because you're going to want the senators to back the war, whatever war you choose. And David Petraeus wrote this Middle East project where there was talking about toppling 7 countries. And just think of 7 countries like 7 banks. You knock over the bank, you get the money. So just that simple. So that's why Hillary spent 2000 to 2009 really working with David Petraeus closely and getting senators like Lindsey Graham and John McCain and people on both sides of the aisle in this oil. It kind of becomes an oil and arms investment club. And then when you become president, you get a lion's share of it. You get about 50% of the takings, and then you probably share about 50% with the senators, who'd have to divide up the other half. Some are more, greedy. Some are less. It just depends. So these topple programs, you can watch earlier videos to see this, but it just outlines how much money is in the bank. There's $30 billion in frozen assets, so they usually go for those. There's $256 billion in Gaddafi's case in Swiss assets, hidden assets, and on you go. Now, if you lose the White House, if Hillary loses in 2008, which she did, she had a plan to knock over 7 countries. So did. You'll see comments by Condoleezza Rice in 2003 saying the same thing. So you kind of have the Republicans and Democrats competing for this 50% of the spoils of war here with this thing called the Middle East Project. Okay, the general is going to win either way, because the Republican or the Democrat, if they win, they're going to need Petraeus on their side. He's the guy who wrote the plans. But the point I wanted to make is, as early as 1996, you can't wait till you get in office to then have your gang, all of a sudden just sprout up from, the sand. You have to be training your gang all along. And that's where I introduced this guy over here from Otpor. He's going to be the one, and he is the one who trained the Muslim Brotherhood. So now you have the Muslim Brotherhood in 32 countries, and that's why, is that you want to be cultivating your gang. Now, he talks about, civil disobedience. He talks about, this is Popovich from Otpor, and there's videos in my document that talk more about this. And he'll talk about this disruption. You have to disrupt. There's actually a part he doesn't talk about, and that's this covert. This is what you see in the press pictures, but this is the covert, the sarin gas and the stingers. Okay, that's your 10%, what they call gladios. Think of them as gladiators. So you have 90% of the people that are, look like, maybe him, protesting, maybe not in camouflage. But then you have a 10%, which is your army, and you have to train this army. So you need a company like DynCorp or some other, like Osprey or some other ex-mercenaries, Delta Force, Special Forces type people, to be training these people all the time, usually about a year before the war, but maybe 6 months before the war. But you need folks in the civilian level for years and years, building the political resistance, okay? So my question today is, did Hillary fund these Gladio programs? We know she is not Bill Clinton. She is the key funding source for this group in Kosovo in 1990 to overthrow the Serbs. And I'll show you a couple of documents that became available that will prove that she not only funded the Gladio program for Europe, but she funded the Gladio program for North Africa and the Middle East and for the U.S. Okay, so that kind of gives you a background. So here's Hillary kind of in her early Senate days, doing what I said, just kind of lining up people on the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee. You also need to have a Soros working in every country with organizations to build up your political base. So this is the military side, the 10%, and then this is your political base. And so this ICG here is basically the spy extension of the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay, and now what happens is Bush gets elected, and he's obviously going to go after Iraq because that has the most oil. And what you want to do is you want to slow them down because you want to knock over these banks. If they get to the bank before you do, then you don't get the money. So Valerie Plame, that's why she gets sent to Iraq, working as Hillary's kind of spy to slow down the Bush move to war. So that's why you're going to see these hidden donors, this Clinton Foundation hidden donors, is these NATO generals as well as these U.S. generals. Because if you don't have an army yourself like Bush did, then the only other way you're going to do a topple is to get NATO to do it for you. Okay, so I'll explain the Valerie Plame angle. So you need to be working on these NATO generals years in advance, and this is actually, you're going to find Valerie Plame here working with folks like this. They're going to be doing those kind of brownstone type operations, get them in compromising positions, take them to the parties, film them doing something embarrassing, and so forth. And as I mentioned, the Gladios are going to, these gladiators, if you will, are going to become available. This 10%, they give them a nice patch. I didn't come up with this patch, they did. But you need to fund it. These ongoing programs and training need money. So that's where we're coming in here with, if you want to use NATO as a backup to the U.S. forces, if you're not going to be the commander-in-chief, you're going to need NATO. That's where you're getting this $240 billion missing. And yesterday I introduced a program called Gladio. This gal worked in the D.C. office of the Counterterrorism Division for the FBI, and she was the one who said there's a second program called Gladio B that Hillary Clinton started. It was basically aimed at the Middle East. It's the Middle East project that we're talking about. I also believe that there's a Gladio C and D, one for the U.S., and it might be called D&D, and then one for North Africa. So this is where a lot of the $6.5 trillion is missing in the U.S. budget. And that's why this amount of money is missing with Chandelon here. The guy was murdered in NATO. Okay, so the reason you send Valerie Plame is into Iraq, and you send her husband into Niger to say there's no uranium, and the WMD story that Colin Powell is going to tell the United Nations is a hoax. That's why she got involved in this. But she's also going to she was in counter-proliferation, so she knows where all the sarin gas is in Libya. You just need to have somebody check that, every once in a while to make sure it hasn't moved. And they have sensors that they can put in to see if the sarin gas moves. So you can see all this really came about in 2003, this topple, okay? So watch the other videos if you want to look at what a brownstone operation is. It's basically what, to get a general to do whatever you want or a politician to do whatever you want. So now here's something that came out today that WikiLeaks said, they offered a $20,000 reward for anyone in the Obama White House that sends them files. Because what happened the last time the Clintons left, as Hillary's doing Kosovo and so forth, she destroyed all the files. She destroyed 2 terabytes of files. So one of the things she destroyed was all the people that worked for her, all the people that were hired, including social security numbers and date of birth. Why is that? Because these people were in the U.S. Gladio program, or what I called diffuse and disrupt. And that's why that was destroyed. But then this gal here, Lael Brainerd is her name, she also destroyed 3 classified documents, and I believe these were the funding documents for the Treasury. You have to get the money from the U.S. Treasury to pay for these programs. And you're going to find that the program, the U.S. Gladio program, was called Presidential Decision Directive 62, or Diffuse and Disrupt. And then there was the Gladio B program was for Europe, okay? So this was all manpower from Arkansas and some of Senator Byrd's old disruptors from West Virginia. And then groups have been added on, but basically the idea is just targeting political opponents initially. But as time has gone on, they've targeted more and more people with the disruption program, okay? So here's PDD 62, the U.S. Gladio program. From the NSA's point of view, it's all about disruption. You know, you can disrupt somebody's life electronically, you know, disrupt their email, disrupt, make sure that email doesn't go through that are like purchase orders or for whatever reason. And then this D&D is diffuse and disrupt is actually with, operatives out in the field. So the key here is that it wasn't just for overseas, it was for the U.S. And this program here is a lot more expensive than doing something overseas. So you have to use a lot of informants and so forth, and you're just kind of in this continual recruiting and training cycle. But here are all the special agents that talk about the huge growth of informants, all the whistleblowers saying, hey, we're not following procedure, we're not opening assessments, we're doing these sneak and break-in type searches without warrants. The whole Constitution is just kind of forgotten. And the FBI has gone through this thing of, let's get rid of all the old agents that know about the Constitution. Let's bring in all these young guys and young gals and train them the way we want to train them. So I think like half of the FBI has changed over since 9/11. I think it's more than that actually. But here's just a reminder that this stuff does happen. Political people saying things like I am saying right now do get targeted because you don't want them you don't want their message going out. So here's where Sid Blumenthal comes out, and Drumheller, who's the guy who owns Osprey, and that was a part of knocking over Gaddafi, also was the boss of Valerie Plame. And so he sent her to Iraq to kind of disturb Bush's oil deal. So the guy who's your brownstone ops guy for the U.S. is going to be the Council on Foreign Relations. The folks coming into those Council on Foreign Relations meetings in New York are the key ones that you want to do these brownstone ops on. You want to have the goods on them so that when the decisions come up about where to put the pipelines and so forth at the strategic level, that's why you want to do the brownstones. And Jeffrey Epstein was that guy in New York, and now Jeffrey Epstein has moved kind of to this little St. James Island for the African folks, as far as African politicians. And then he also has a New Mexico ranch for doing Sinaloa, for doing work with the Sinaloa folks. So and everybody says, oh, how can you prove this? Well, here's Osprey, and here's General Grange, and here's Sid Blumenthal, all in the same company. And the head of intelligence in Europe is Drumheller. He was in the same company, now dead. So, and this is what happens. So these are going to be the folks for the U.S. program. What Gladio does is it caches weapons all over a country, and then and while people are training, so they can, at a moment's notice, go get the guns and take over. So you're going to find this is going to be your U.S. Gladio for weapons. They are a big weapons company right here, Osprey is. So, okay, and I'll finish off on this one, just reminding everybody that the counterterrorism division of the FBI, which was run by McCabe, is where your disruption campaigns happen. So this is diffuse and disrupt. The idea is break up relationships between people, make sure that they don't go to the ballet anymore, make sure they don't go to the sporting activities, knock down everything they do to just try to isolate and then focus the attention of disruption on them as one single individual with a lot of other, informants kind of moving in and out, of their life. And so that's where we are now with this D&D in the U.S. And as you see, as we move along, McCabe keeps getting these quid pro quos. He keeps getting more agents as he obstructs the Clinton Foundation investigation at every turn. So will we see these 14 State Department Gmail accounts when WikiLeaks releases them a little bit later this month? Who knows? We certainly don't want to wait 5 years, and we certainly want to get back to investigating Haiti, because we know that the folks there say 2% of the money actually was spent. And that's over a 25-year period, not just since the earthquake in 2010. So, we got to get away from no grand juries, no subpoenas, no court orders, immunity to all the co-conspirators, letting all the co-conspirators interview together, not interviewing under oath, all these things, not opening assessments, not turning over interview summaries to Jason Chaffetz in oversight. So all these things, walling off this investigation to the Miami office, the bribe of $675,000, et cetera. So that'll be it for today. I just wanted to talk about the U.S. Gladio program, and that's the D&D.